Andy's consistent. You've got to give him credit for that. When Andy sees something, he sticks to it and he does not let up. Since the 2012 season, meaning since 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, Andy has gotten a tie each and every year. He tied Hensel this week at the buzzer of the 2016 season, 117 to 117. The man's got a list. You know, he's got a list of priorities for every season. At the top of his list, and he broke that rule, Andy says, I will not trade. That's at the beginning of every list for Andy in the fantasy seasons. I will not trade. Number 2, tie with somebody. And all the way at the bottom of the list, numbered at maybe 58, 60, win a championship. Not really a priority for Andy. We'll get to that later, though. This is your Week 13 / Round 1 preview. So it's a recap and it's a preview. So mostly what I'm going to do in this installment is I'm going to give you some stats for the season. And I'm going to give you just a few reasons as to why I think a particular owner will be the champion this year. But first, we've got to start off with Pedro. I started off the show last week talking about Pedro and discussing the downfall of Pedro's team, how he started 5-0, and how this week he had to fight for his fantasy life. And this week, Pedro just couldn't do it. He gave it up. It was all in Pedro's hands. It wasn't in Hensel's hands. And Pedro his team just didn't want it enough. There's been a big difference with the Pedro that started the season and the Pedro that ended the season. Week 1 through week 3, Pedro's team scored 305 points. That's 3 weeks. Now, week 10 to week 13, and within those 2 weeks, within the last 3 weeks, Pedro got the Tito Award. Pedro scored 213 points from week 10 to week 13. That's a big difference. It's a very long fantasy season, and I told you guys that at the beginning of the season. When I started off, 1-4, 1-5, sure, I didn't make the playoffs. I get that. But my point is that if somebody can start 5-0, well, then if I was 1-4, and I'm sure somebody did that at one point in fantasy. If I was 1-4, I could have easily made the playoffs. I couldn't make the adjustments, and I didn't make the right move, so that didn't happen. But my point is, you can start off 5-0, and it doesn't fucking matter. We're equals now. Hensel started off the season 2-3, first 5 games, if we're going to compare to Pedro's first 5 games. Hensel's in the playoffs. Pedro isn't. Big difference. It's a long season, kitty, so you have to hold tight even when you have a terrible start. Even if you have a great start, hold tight, because those next 3 or 4 weeks are really what's going to determine the future of your team. Now, some of you started off great and you stuck through it. Ed, I think, won 9 games in a row, but Ed came within almost losing to Joe. He nearly lost the division from Eric, and Ed really needs that bye week. He knows he does. Kamish pretty much stayed solid throughout the season, and as a matter of fact, just like Eric, got better as the season went along. The only 2 teams that did that. Paul pretty much coasted. I think that Paul and Andy, and maybe you could throw Hensel in there. Maybe not if Hensel started off with the 2-3 record. Paul and Andy sort of just coasted and pretty much just stayed in the middle of everything, which is very surprising that Andy won the division. But, obviously the Caparel division, I believe is our division, wasn't really that strong this year. So again, it's a very long season. Drope didn't make it to the playoffs. It's okay. It's okay, Dro. Just, you're one of us. You're just going to sit here and you're going to watch somebody fucking get their ass reamed this week. So I'm going to read off the scoring leaders for the season. The top 5 scoring leaders for the season. So Eric gets the scoring title this year with 1,362 points. Orlando is second with 1,289 points. Ed is third with 1,273. Andy's fourth with 1,226. Paul is number 5 with 1,174 points. And I just want to add that Eric got 1,362 points this year. Guess who got 1,363 last year? Bundy. Though that is no longer his name, I understand. See, now I'm detaching myself from the Bundy name. All right? That is no longer his name anymore. And yes, he will burn his shirt championship week. The best winning streak to close out the season, the hottest team right now is Orlando with 5 wins in a row. And the worst team, obviously, was Dro, closing out with 3 losses in a row. Now, as far as division leaders and division champions, I looked at the papers as far as division winners, and the only 2 teams that never won a division, one really isn't much of a surprise, they're both not really a surprise. Paul and Hensel have never won division championships. Orlando has 3, and everyone else, a lot of us are just pretty much just stuck at 2. You've got Joe with 2, Jay with 2, Dro with 2, Andy with 2, Eric with 1, me with 1, and Ed won his first division this year. Again, as I said, these are going to be random stats that I'm throwing at you, so try to catch those motherfuckers. Joe outdid himself this season. Joe, as I said, in his historic 2014 season, Joe scored 951 points, and this year, Joe put up an anemic 900 flat. Joe, it pains me to say this, but technically it wasn't his worst season because at least he won 2 games. Winning more games is more important than the scoring. So Joe didn't quite make history in that sense. He's not as consistent as Andy. Go figure. Teams of the week, the highest points of each week. The teams that won the most, Ed won 3. Eric wins 3, and Orlando. Why did I say Orlando? Orlando won 3 as well. And I should also add that the commission won 3 in a row at one point. The most Tito awards were Joe with 7. Pedro came at second with 3. Week 9 is where we saw the largest margin of victory. Eric defeated Joe 140 to 55. That's a figure of 85 points. In that very same week, we had Orlando with the highest point total of the season with 148. And I could have sworn I had the lowest number scored, and I believe that was also Dro, which was about 51 points. I'll look that up again. I apologize, Dro. I had another opportunity to shit on you. I couldn't even do that. Well, I did you a favor. There you go. Now, let's move on to the draft. I have a couple of notes here for the draft. By far the worst fantasy pick. I mean, the biggest dud far and wide this season. And, this guy, he can't even disagree. And that's DeAndre Hopkins for Jay. DeAndre Hopkins, he's only gotten 85 points for Jay this season. I understand. I mean, it's not necessarily DeAndre's fault. That fucking Osweiler, tall motherfucker for the Texans, that guy got that big contract, and for whatever reason, he's not connecting with his star receiver. But nonetheless, it's 85 points for Jay. At this point, he might have even benched him a couple times, and I wouldn't even be surprised because week 6, Hopkins scored 7. Week 7, he got 3, then he got 4 points, then there was a bye, then he got 4, then he got 5, then he got 7. Now this week he got 11. That's not his highest point total, but it's pretty close. He got 17 in week 2. Now, as far as the picks that worked, the best pick by far in the fantasy draft was Orlando's pick of Melvin Gordon. Melvin Gordon has scored 199 points. He's the 30th. He's the third ranked running back. That was Orlando's 6th pick, the 55th pick overall. I'd hate to admit this next one. This next one's really going to fucking hurt my dick for even saying this. But Paul's pick of LeGarrette Blount was a short second to that. LeGarrette Blount is a 6th ranked running back. He scored 168 points. Paul drafted him in the 10th round, and that's the 92nd overall pick. So that's getting a bang for your buck. I'm going to have to bring it back to Pedro. Drope, we're bringing it back to you. And you know what? And I'll add that, of course, my demise in the draft were Cam Newton obviously not living up to what he was supposed to. I guess that was a minor reason. The other two strong reasons are because my 4th and my 5th pick were injured for a large part of the season with Langford and Rawls. Matt Jones could never really figure out, in Washington, they never really could figure out if it's Matt Jones or whatever. I mean, it pretty much seems to be Kelly at this point, but that's pretty much where my team ended up sucking dick in that regard. Pedro had the worst luck as far as the draft went. Even worse than Joe, who picked Adrian Peterson at number 3 and obviously had him get hurt. Even worse than Hensel, who lost Gronk just a couple weeks ago. And even worse than Ed, who lost A.J. Green about 2 weeks ago. Pedro's 2nd pick was Eddie Lacy. Eddie Lacy got hurt. His 3rd pick, suspended, Alshon Jeffrey. His 4th pick, Keenan Allen, hurt. His 7th pick, Yeldon. He fucking sucks. 8th pick, John Brown. He's John Brown. Woodhead, 10th pick, hurt. Forsett, 12th pick. He's Forsett. And probably the one that hurt the most was Jay Ajayi, which was Pedro's 13th pick in the draft. Now, I'm not sure if Pedro ended up dropping him. I'm assuming that he did because I can remember the week when Hensel picked up Jay Ajayi from the player basket. That probably hurt the most because Jay Ajayi is currently the 11th ranked running back in fantasy. And oh, by the way, he's owned by Hensel, which is the man who personally stuck that fucking You guys ever saw that scene in Saving Private Ryan? I think it was when one of the American soldiers had this very intense and fucking heated battle for his life with that Russian soldier, and that Russian soldier just drove that knife into his fucking chest while he was like muttering probably some idealistic nonsense. I don't know what the fuck he was saying. And he just dropped it in his fucking chest. That's exactly what Hensel did to Pedro. So that's what makes it hurt even more that Jay Ajayi, was lost by Pedro. So now, well, you know what? Here's what I'll do. Because I did say that this was going to be a recap for Week 13. So I guess as I would traditionally do, I would read off the scores. I defeated Paul. 79-71. Eric defeats Pedro 101-74. Orlando comes out on top on Jay. That sounded really gay, didn't it? 109-77. Ed beats Joe 93-80. And as I said, you had the 117-117 tie between Andy and Hensel. They are the highest scoring teams of the week. And of course, I gave Paul a motherfucking Tito Award. Since this is the preview for the very first round, I figure what I'll do is lay out just the several reasons why I think I've got a winner here. I've picked the winner, okay? So what I'm going to read to you are the starting player rankings, and what this is are those little numbers on the right side of the players' names that that tell you the ranking within the league. And I've added up all the rankings that everyone has at their starting positions, and sometimes I even considered who they normally play or who they are going to play, and that's pretty much who they put in their lineup. So I've added up the numbers. So obviously what you would like to have is the lowest number, because if you have a team full with number ones, your ranking is like an 8 or a 7 or whatever the fuck, right? So out of all the playoff teams, at number 6 is Ed with a total of 175. we've got Hensel at number 5 with 149. Okay, so yeah, we've got O at number 4 with 99 points. Then we've got Andy at 95. Sorry, we've got Andy at number 3 with 95 points. And then we've got Paul, surprisingly, at number 2 with 67. And we've got Eric at number 1 with 63. I'd also like to let you guys know that I also put together basically the all-star team for the fantasy season. And it goes as follows, motherfuckers. Number 1 wide receiver for the regular season, Antonio Brown, owned by Eric. Number 1 quarterback for the fantasy season, Aaron Rodgers, owned by Eric. Number 1 running back of the fantasy season, David Johnson, owned by Orlando. Number 1 tight ends for the 2016 fantasy season. It's a 3-way tie between Andy, Eric, and Dro. It's Greg Olsen for Dro, Delaney Walker for Andy, and Jimmy Graham for Eric. Number 1 defense, the Vikings, owned by Orlando. And number 1 kicker, kickers are people too. Don't fucking get upset at me. It's Justin Tucker, owned by Eric once again. If we look at the bracket here, if we look at the playoff bracket, it's pretty plain to see. Obviously, you have Ed and Andy on buys. I'm living in the fucking twilight zone that Ed and Andy have buys, but, broken clock. And you've got Paul going up against Orlando, and you've got Hensel going up against Eric. In my mind, Eric pretty much has the easiest road. Not that it's obviously playoff teams are the stronger teams, but the easier compared to, say, Orlando or Paul. He doesn't have an easier road than Ed, obviously. The easiest road to the championship is Eric's, considering the fact that he is facing the 6th ranked team in Hensel, and he has the weaker of both division winners in Andy. Andy, who's had a solid few weeks. I mean, Kirk Cousins, he's getting his shit together. Andy he's also managed to do something that kind of shut me the fuck up, because he's been playing Kirk Cousins and it's been successful. And maybe it's because, the cream is rising to the top and Kirk Cousins is maybe just going to be a better fantasy quarterback than Matt Ryan is at the end of the season. But as it stands, I'm just saying, for the following week, if Andy just so chooses to play him again, Matt Ryan's at number 3 and Kirk Cousins is at number 5. And Matt Ryan, if I'm not mistaken, is facing the San Francisco 49ers. That's a very good matchup. While Kirk Cousins is facing the Carolina Panthers. That's a very good matchup too. So, needless to say that I think that the champion of this fantasy season will be Eric. And I don't want to run through, the scenarios of, but as far as what I'll tell you, my prediction for this week is I think, and if I'm not mistaken, the games will start in about an hour or so. You have the only people that are out right now is Eric with Latavius Murray. As far as I'm aware, that's a decent matchup, I guess, against the Kansas City Chiefs, who are facing the Raiders tonight. Ed also has, what's that wide receiver's name? Whoever the fuck it is that he picked up. Ed also has Amari Cooper, but obviously Ed is not playing this week. And you've got Paul, who has Kelsey. I think it's going to be very simple. Even though Eric has injury issues with Aaron Rodgers, it's not going to be enough for Hensel to take Eric down. It's not going to be enough because Hensel just doesn't have enough firepower on his team. And as far as the other matchup, I totally think that the commish is going to very handily, if that's the right term, he's going to handily beat Paul. I think that would be the biggest margin. In fact, I'll give you a figure right now. Just give me a second as it's gonna go on my Rain Man. I've decided that Turtle Power will win 110-73 and give me Ewok Rape 103 to 94. These are the numbers that I've just made up out the top of my head. That is it. Do not fucking question me. Ewok Rape will be the champion this season. And I'm not saying it to jinx him. I honestly think that he's got the best shot at winning this. And oh, by the way, he was also the top point getter in the season. Last year's top point getter was me. I made it all the way to the championship. Obviously, I didn't win, but normally when the point getter makes it past round one, it's pretty much just a fucking theme that's developing here. I think one season, Paul, of course, was the number one point getter, and he got his fucking ass ousted in the first round by who? Bundy. So that was your Week 13 recap / round one preview. As always, do not forget, even though you are playoff teams in this year, you are above me. May your quarterbacks get hurt before they leave the locker room. May your running backs pull their hamstrings. And may your wide receivers get arrested for marijuana possession. Go fuck yourselves. And good luck.